Guys, have you ever stopped to think about how games are created in terms of graphics? Man, at least in my day, we talked a lot about graphics, about how much they caught your eye. And even today, I think it's something people look at that lets us dive into a world and really makes us feel more or less interested in a game. And so for graphics, we also have to think about aesthetics, right? What makes a game, well, what makes it possible to be made in that way, for example? We could even think, wow, this game is made in Unreal, which is Dispatch, by the way, okay? There are other games made in Unreal with completely different styles. What changes from one to the other? Here we have Subnautica 2, also made in Unreal, and we can go to The Witcher 4, also made in Unreal. What are the decisions made within a studio, or what actually makes games look so different so that the graphics are built like this? And I'll tell you right now, man, the answer is complex and it requires, well, it's full of details, okay? Because there are countless steps. So it's really cool for us to understand if you know very little about game creation, about how games are made, man, this is gonna blow your mind. It sounds like a lie, but looking at and understanding how games work gives you another way to play video games. You can enjoy it even more, okay? If you already like this intro to what you're about to see, I recommend you check out the description here. There's a really cool link for you that will expand your mind even more, which is the link to my course. Man, it's at a great price. Take a look, there's even a video of what it's like inside. I'm sure you'll like it. Well, to explain this in detail, I have here, look, tables that I modeled myself very quickly for us to understand. And then I textured these tables, and I didn't bring them into my game, but this is the setting of my game that will help us understand a little bit more, right? I made another video about this setting here on the channel anyway, about how settings work in games, how they really are, how they're created. So I want to talk now about the issue of graphics. To start with, what will define something that helps define the graphics for our game is the number of faces that 3D objects have. 3D objects, they're formed by faces, edges, and vertices. So these three, they will define how much an object is less or more defined, so to speak. I'll tell you, in real life, me here, I'm made of atoms. So the amount of detail to form my hand, man, who knows, right? Absurd. Now, when we go to a 3D universe, we need to draw these things. And these vertices, these faces, these lines, these edges end up giving that definition. So here I have three tables, and you notice that there are different levels of definition with the larger amount from left to right. So I have this table here, which is more blocky. Then I have this one that's intermediate, and I have this one that's much more divided. So which of these do you think tends to be used? For a game that's going to be more realistic? Well, this one, or this one? Definitely this last one. So games that are more realistic, that bring this type of look, tend to have more objects with more faces. So here we'll have the case of The Witcher or the case of Cyberpunk itself, right? So all of these objects, they aren't that low poly. Low poly means having few polygons. Basically, everything you look at, especially in 3D, are polygons. So here you have polygons, here you have, in this case, rectangles, but games work a lot with triangles. This is basically 3D modeling for you to understand. So if you want a game that's going to be more stylized, or if you want a game that has sometimes a look that doesn't require you to have such a high polygon count, you can go ahead and use this one. If it works for you, great. Even objects further away or that aren't as prominent on screen will have a lower polygon count. Because then it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to have so much definition, you know? If it's far away, man, you can make it in a simpler way. In fact, there are many games that use just a single face with a texture for things that are further away. So you don't need to model every single detail because if it's far away and blurry, it's fine. So this is the kind of thing you need to understand. And the more abstract it is, the more we can get creative within the game. The further from reality it is, the more we can play with these styles, you know? So you'll see objects in Fortnite itself with a more blocky characteristic, like this one here. It turns out they're lighter to be processed by our GPU. Our GPU is going to process the trying these. The more triangles, the harder, the slower, the more complicated the calculation will be. The fewer there are, the better, the easier it is to process. And that's why, right off the bat, games that tend to be more realistic will use more processing and tend to be heavier. But that's just one of the steps we're going to take. Because often there will be games that are a bit more stylized and such, and that will use this type of, object with a higher polygon count. Even if we look at Subnautica itself, it has a stylized look, but notice that they're really objects, with a polygon count. That's high. So it's relative, man. Just because a game is stylized doesn't mean it's going to be extremely light, and like I said, that's just one of the details. What's the other detail we have regarding this? A very important one that will define the look. If you freeze this image right here and look at it, wow, you're seeing colors, you're seeing, a very vast combination of colors. And that leads us into texturing. If you have a 3D object, you're gonna have to put it somewhere with a look. You'll have to give it a, you'll have to paint it. I didn't want to say paint, but that's basically it. You'll give it a color and combine several textures to give it. You'll define how it reflects light, which part is more or less rough. Anyway, all of that. So this is another part that will really define if the game will be what kind of look it's going to have. A game can even be realistic. And depending on the texturing, it ends up being lighter, okay? You can do that because texturing is very, very important. How so? Well, I modeled these 3 tables and imported them here into Adobe Substance Painter. You see, there are 3 tables where I applied different texturing. So I have the first table here. See, it's more blocky, but I also used a material that's a more stylized wood. And then for the others, I ended up using 2 others. Look, I used a texture here, a material that's more realistic, or at least a bit closer to real life, and a style that's not so stylized. For the middle one, it's stylized, but notice how that also makes a difference, how it also impacts things. So let me take this one here, which has a quality. It has a more detailed look, and I'm going to remove it so we can see its material. It's even lagging a bit here because I have too many things open, right? But let's see. Actually, I had already put several on it. Look, there's this one here, which is hand-painted wood, which is the same as the second one. And it turned out very similar. And now let me go here to the third one. Let me remove it. And it's also similar, right? But I think the others are still having an effect. Look. Let me remove this one from the other one here. This one has 2. Let me take this first one and put it here on the second one, just so we can take a look at how it looks. And another important detail when we talk about this is that objects, when you're working on them to be more stylized, you can and should, in many cases, exaggerate some features, right? Here, I made some tables that are very simple. So it ends up that there isn't that much of a difference. But to me, this table here, it's more stylized because it's more blocky, like it conveys that vision more. Especially if you look at this side here. Look, some are exaggerated. This one is much closer to a Fortnite style than that other one with a higher count. A face is luck. This one here, depending on the lighting in your scene, and I'll talk about that, lighting and post-processing, it won't look as stylized as that other one because it's more blocky. Let me go ahead and apply a more realistic texture, so to speak, okay? Or closer to reality. Look, man, this table fits perfectly. Now, let's take the one that's more stylized, with a lower face count, and let me apply it to see how the effect looks. And this is also a cost-benefit trade-off you have to watch out for, right? So with this table here, with these edges, pass for my realistic game or for the aesthetic my game aims for? My game, meaning your game when you're making it. Man, if it passes, great, you can use it. You can also change the texturing quite a bit there to make it look the way you want. And then maybe you use this one with a lower face count and it still does what you need. But in many cases, it doesn't, because it has these more well-defined edges here. Look, because it's more blocky, like it doesn't pass, you know? It doesn't fit what you want. So you end up using this one, which, note, looks much, much more detailed, smooth. It's really a matter of the project's goal. So this one, although it didn't look horrible or anything, and depending on the game, it might even work, still, at least in my view, it ended up looking better with a more stylized texturing. I'll even bring it back here so we can take a look at how it was before. It got closer to this one, and it's always cool to also mix them, right? You can keep mixing the materials. Look at that. Man, it looks beautiful. It turned out really cool for a textured object, and there's not that much difference. I didn't exaggerate that much, but it turns out that this is how graphics are built. You need to think about what the face count will be, then you need to think about what the texturing part will be like. And note that these are two paths that followed in a way, right? It was a fork in the road, and it's a matter of choice, you know? A simple matter of choice. Because this object here, like a short while ago, it was very similar to this one. Now, by having this texture, by having this count, it starts to diverge, you know? It goes in another direction. But it's a basic matter of choice. After that, there are two things that make a big difference, okay? Which is the lighting and the other. I'm always saying here on the channel, and I'll say it again. But before that, I have to tell you guys that there's a really cool pack with an insane discount in the description. Man, it used to cost around $5,000 to get all those items that are listed there. But with the discount coupon in the description, it's about $40. It's a huge discount. I even showed some of the items in a previous video, that are in this pack. If you want to grab it, it's for a limited time, and it's from Leartes Studios, which is a very professional, amazing studio with high-quality assets. And there you have it. Sometimes stylized items, sometimes a quality that's more realistic. Anyway, various styles. For a single pack, just one item in this pack makes it worth getting, okay? It's in the description and pinned comment. It's for a limited time. So, as I was saying, I have to talk about lighting. Because the lighting in the scene, the way it's composed, will showcase more or less of this type of item. If you look at more stylized games like Fortnite, you'll have more intense light, you'll have a different type of lighting, especially for the interior parts. So lights and reflections end up being incredibly strong points for you to achieve more realism or have more stylized effects. I don't even need to say it, right? Cyberpunk is here for that. But there's another point that changes everything, which is post-processing. Post-processing is something that's added to each frame at the end. It's one of the last stages of rendering a frame. In other words, a picture. The GPU will generate these frames to put what you're seeing on the screen. But at the end, it will add one last step. So it's post-processing. It gathers everything from the basic part, sends it to the screen, and then, before displaying it, applies post-processing frame by frame. And you can control things like sensitivity, light, contrast, how the colors will be, chromatic aberration separating. It usually appears in the corner of the screen. There's a bit of it here actually in this video which separates the RGB channels, that is, red, green, blue. So you can add various effects, including more definition or less definition, all of that in post-processing. In my game here, I have post-processing that, of course, is inspired, very inspired, just really inspired by Resident Evil, which is a game series one think is fantastic. So if I bring it up here and open it, notice the scene looks a certain way, right? In fact, this entire environment was hand-modeled by me. Modeled and textured. It's a lot of work, isn't it? So anyway, this and other environments. So if I come here to the outliner and put in post-process, you'll see that if I take it out, the scene will change completely. This right here is the lighting and the post-processing default of the Unreal Engine. Notice how things end up looking very different. And the 3D objects themselves, they change. Basically, they change, like the way you see them, or it gets more saturated. And that's what happens in many cases for many of the games. Here, it's packed with post processing. That's basically what they changed here, right? Including the texture pack, which is the texturing. So, when you're going to work on this type of game, which is Dispatch, you make it so that the character modeling here, actually, there's modeling with a very high polygon count, but you make it so the texturing is totally stylized. So, I showed you guys what stylized texturing is. Basically, you choose for the characters to be like this. But you also add a post processing that will take care of the reflection and how the material and texture will behave on the body of each of these actors. This is the construction of a graphic. Okay, explained to you in a basic way, but it's something very, very dense. And that's how we gradually get to understand how games are created. I often see people commenting on game creation and in an obviously lay way, right? From the point of view of just someone who plays and commenting on things that, well, aren't true about game development in general. To understand how games are created, understand the graphics, what causes one thing or another, it's often many, many details you need to understand, a chain of things, until you get to why a game looks a certain way, why it's heavy, why it's optimized, why it has this look, why it has that look. So often people say, for example, that all Unreal Engine games are the same, and it's a massive absurdity. Right here, I have some examples, right? Dispatch, Subnautica, The Witcher itself. They're three games made in Unreal with completely different graphics. It's a choice. And I've shown you throughout this video how much of a choice it is. So it's much more the merit of the artists. Of course, each graphics engine will have its advantage anyway, its quality, its strong point, and it'll be easier or harder for each studio to work and get the best out of it. But what defines a game's graphics, guys, is a whole lot of stuff. So it's much more the merit of the artist being able to convey that, okay? Hope you liked it. Check the links in the description. I'm sure you'll like them, okay? That pack over there is actually fantastic. I've already shared it. If you're curious about how it looks, I have a video showing that pack. And also for my course, which is at a great price, which is in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks for watching until the end. See you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye. I'm out.